maybe we do a super quick introduction from Sean, Brian, and myself. Like very quickly, I can start. I'm Kaspar, one of the founders of Humanitec, but I want to make it explicitly clear that this is not about anything product related. This is more about the cultural approach to platform engineering. Then over to you, Sean.
Yep, I'm Sean Alvarez. I'm the head of business platforms at ThoughtWorks EMPC North America.
And then we have Brian.
Yeah, I'm Brian Oliver. I'm a principal architect on the platform engineering team at ThoughtWorks and occasional Kubernetes SIG network contributor.
Fantastic. Good to have you. And so I wanted to maybe, if you allow me, spend like 3 minutes on something that I've been thinking about lately and see whether that might be a discussion starter. And that is a way to map the pain to value element of platform engineering. And I think this is interesting because I think there's some, I would like to get your opinion really on the persona groups mentioned here, because there are a lot of conversations that we're having. I just had a long conversation with my dearest friends at Gartner about this. So here, this is actually like a pain to value pyramid I've been working on. If organizations come to us and we talk about things, we always ask them, what's your pain points? And then we've been starting to cluster the things that they're saying. And if you want to have my top 4, and that's from I think like 700 conversations in the last 12 months, not that I did, but that were executed, that we analyzed. It was from a developer perspective, that there's slow cognitive load, waiting times, and missing self-service. And then it was very interesting that it's really not only about the developer, but it's also about the infrastructure and operation teams and security teams. And I'm just clustering them in there. And for them, it's low standardization, ticket operations, manual reviews, insecure configurations, and cost spiraling. And I thought about, okay, how can we simplify that down? And what are the value drivers to actually resolve those pain points? And I thought about, okay, automation on one part and standardization. And then if I'm looking at the composition of platform engineering teams I'm talking to, they're obviously the architects, they're the PMs, the product owners, best case. And then it's as if the different teams are sending their ambassadors to the platform team. And I've been clustering them for the developer side as DevX platform engineers. And then the infrastructure and operations folks send, and that's a Gartner term, but I actually like it, infrastructure platform engineers. That's a pretty interesting way of looking at this. And, there's DevX, there's not InfraX. For some reason, people think, okay, infrastructure people, they're sitting in the basement anyways. They don't deserve experience. But that's interesting. And then, together they serve the organization, which is about shipping more features with less cost. Yeah. So I thought that was, an interesting way of looking at this, mapping what do we hear most against what are the personas that we see and how are the analysts talking about this. What is your experience? And I would like everybody who has like an experience there wants to contribute, just unmute or raise your hand, and I'll weave you in. But starting with you, maybe Brian, like, how do you see the composition of engineering teams? Like, is the primary user the developer, or do we need to be more multifaceted?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Whenever we come into these like larger enterprises that are trying to modernize platform engineering, we often see sort of an evolution take place. And so it will start off with, we have this infrastructure team and we like to turn them into a platform team. And usually that just distracts from the infrastructure team's current duties. And so we find it's better to evolve into having a dedicated platform team at first. Jumping ahead to things like DevX engineers, or some other sort of dedicated resources for teams before you've really defined that platform level, is sort of a misstep in that evolution. So we found it's just really powerful to allow that to evolve over time. And if that need arises, then we help build that. Often we'll see, though, you may not have DevX engineers at all. You may actually have an SRE team sort of filling that gap as you have a platform team evolve and get better and get mature and surface control plane APIs and platform orchestrators to all those different teams. You see SREs start to pick things up and help teams use those. We've seen that quite a few times. That's also a powerful pattern. So they're not quite operating in a DevX role, though, because those SRE teams will also often create policy, which leads teams to them when they're failing said policy. So it's sort of a different way or a different approach to think about.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, check.
I will offer an input on the value on the top of the pyramid. That time to market and cost is definitely there, but I would say that I would add on that this is not everything. The other aspect is that automatization and the reuse and the automation enables teams to leverage experimentation. There's no experimentation without automation, and without experimentation, you can go lean. So the opportunities on the lean are, I would say, there are few times bigger than the time to market and cost.
Yeah, and one piece I would put here is, when we go into some of these very large organizations, the change that engineering platforms put in place goes across silos of the organization. So it's not just developers on, say, a customer-facing team. There's developers doing internal tools, but it also bleeds into, say, the security part of the organization. So the CTO might be looking at time to market and cost, but the CISO is actually looking for hardened security for more standard networking controls, right? So that they can essentially minimize their risk in the market of an attack or some sort of negative consequence. The CFO may be looking more at FinOps and maybe looking at better cost controls, better efficiency and usage, right? So I think it is fair to kind of roll it up that ultimately, time to market and cost is going to be the biggest driver. But to your point, Asik, even somebody like the CMO, right, Chief Marketing Officer, they're looking for experimentation. They're looking for ways that we can find new market share quickly. So they're going to get value out of this platform as well.
There is a risk to it because there is a friction. On one hand, on the CPO and experimentation on the product side, platform changes or helps transform organization to embrace this model, and on the side of the CISO and the CIO, this is more about the current phase. That you want to kind of protect mitigate the current risk. So there will be a struggle between those two forces.
Definitely, and on that topic, aligning those different stakeholders, and that's also something that we got a ton before the call here in terms of questions, and that's sort of that always nagging question. How do you go about figuring out how to please all of their stakeholders? And then other questions, and from like asked in a different way, like what's the starting point that you set in order to say, okay, well, here's the crystallization. Now let's iterate from there. But how do you, like, what's that first point to get going when there's so many opinions and people involved?
Yeah, I think for me, from our experiences, what we found is we tend to focus on one stakeholder in the beginning, because if you try to satisfy every single one at the inception of your platform, like you said, you're going to be inundated with different competing priorities. What we find is as we evolve that platform, though, we can begin to take in the priorities of additional stakeholders. For example, if we start with a base platform and then evolve it to the point where we've automated security into the platform, we can begin to address the needs of the CISO through that evolution. But until we get to that stage of building the platform, there's not really a reason to necessarily prioritize at that point. It's like, first, we just need to enable the ability to build a base layer, right? So we found that it's good to get input, but it's good also to maintain your own backlog and maintain it as a product and really work on that backlog as a product with that first stakeholder. And that's really effective. Sean, I think you're unmuted.
Yeah, I think, that product-driven approach, you start small, right? Address one stakeholder and address them well, right? Because now you're doing the right thing, but you're also doing it the right way. And they can see that, so other people start to get on board. And as a product, you're also going to have a roadmap. And now you can show that roadmap that we're going to address certain stakeholder concerns at this point in the product. And then if you have a product owner, we like to use the term technical product owner, because in the infrastructure domain, there's some unique concerns that they want to think about. That product owner can now talk to these different stakeholders that have competing priorities, can organize that roadmap, can organize that backlog, and effectively sell the platform product internally to the organization. And I'm sure there's some of you on the call here that have kind of started down this road. I'd be interested to hear any approaches that maybe you took in your organization, what's worked well, maybe what hasn't worked and had to be retargeted.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to know what hasn't worked well. That's always fun to dive into.
Let's sort this a little bit. Juan, you want to go first? I think you unmuted, and then Jacek. Okay. Jacek, do you want to take it?
So the one thing that's what I'm doing right now is like we adopted the start small model. So we are working with one application and one team, but we interview all stakeholders. We adopted, like we did proper discovery session with all stakeholders, understand to first align them on the kind of vision what we are doing, and at the same time recognize what are the key concerns and the key changes for them. So basically to avoid accidentally missing some of those things. But we are prioritizing it, sequencing it from smaller, so we don't address everything at once. The one risk that my team did in the past, or the kind of trap that we fall in the past, was that we focused too much and too early on the security, and that led to more shifting the focus of the platform from the platform that was solving the needs of the teams, from the kind of enabling platform, into a very constrained platform that was more enforcing, which prioritized standardization over the productivity. So that's something that I would strongly avoid in the future.
Very interesting point. Yeah. Anybody else who? Yeah, please. Okay, so unless you just raise your hand, then I know then I'm more confident that you want to talk. I wanted to let's see what have we here. Yeah, and so one thing that, because we're doing these initiatives a lot, and we've been lately, thinking about how do we explain recommendations on how to do adoption profiles. And here's a little bit of a some thoughts that I just jotted down with strange graphics. But this is actually an interesting quote, because 10 people who yell make more noise than 10,000 who keep silent. And that's a fantastic thing for platform engineering, actually, here from our dear fragile little kitten Napoleon, because it can be in the positive direction, right, and in the negative direction. If you have 10 people that are very negative, you're done. If you have 10 people that are very positive, you're done. Now, and we are segmenting platform engineering actually in 3 key phases, and that's also, if we work with the ThoughtWorks guys, there's a minimum viable platform phase that we want to get out fast to test something, then the production readiness, and then production scaling. And we want to, and I always say, like, people have no idea how small you should stay for a very long time. Like, people always want to say, like, hey, we should get a lot of people, everybody's excited. And that's exactly the wrong thing to do. I think, Jacek, you're so right there. And I thought about these 4 golden rules. Start small, scale super slow, way slower than you think. And then what's so important, pick the right first team to start. I have no idea how important that is, that you don't pick the wrong starter team. Because if you pick the wrong one, you might be done with your initiative in 6 months. Then you overinvest in the experience, right? It's like building a product for a startup. It has to be 10x better than what they have right now, or nobody gives a shit. Like nobody will want to retrain if it's not amazing. And then you want to have day-to-day usage. So I'm seeing so many people that say, we have ton of pipelines, let's put Backstage on top. Nothing wrong with Backstage, nothing wrong with pipelines. But if you build something that people use once a quarter, you don't win. You're like, we want daily usage. Otherwise, start small is pretty obvious. But pick the right team to start is less obvious. And I always say, like, take a list all the teams you could add. And the first thing you do, that at the bottom of the list are your heavy Helm chart, Terraform, Linux kernel hackers. Do not assume you'll have them on the platform either ever, or if you'll have them on the platform in 2 years. Like, you will continuously overestimate the maturity rate of your platform, and it will suck for a very long time because you're building a product. It's naive to believe you'll have a great product in 6 months. It needs to be well-rounded. And so the first ones you'll get on are the ones that are, overwhelmed. I love to work with Java developers because they love abstraction. They don't really care. They just want to build Java apps. And so those are great starter teams. I loved the point on the security thing. Don't get the most security-heavy production usage app on, but get one that nobody really cares about. And then interview the teams in the pain points and tell them, we are going to make it convenient and amazing. And then all you're focusing on is building people that say, wow, this was fantastic. Very happy infrastructure people, very happy developers. Everybody's happy. And if you only make 10 people happy, you'll have a problem keeping up with the amount of people that want to onboard in the next phase. And so I just wanted to take this out there. That's really the magic, right? Don't assume you're going to build something great fast, and like abandon everything you thought about how fast you should be. You should be slow, right? It's a game of being slow.
Yeah, and I really can second that, by talking about what happens when you do scale too fast. Because again, if you do it right, you'll have people banging on the door that they want to start using the platform because they're seeing what other teams are getting out of using the platform. The problem is that in any large enterprise, as much as you want to be standardized, not every team is going to do things the same way. Nor should they, right? If you want to innovate and have a wide array of offerings as a company. So when teams come in, they need slightly different things. They need slightly different workflows. Now, if you have, say, 10 teams on the platform because you've been scaling slowly, it's a lot easier to tell a team the way you work, the way you deliver software is great for the way you use now. But if you come onto the platform, we're going to need you to change a couple things because the platform has a way of working. The platform has expected standards, and you're going to have to align to those in order to use it because we're not going to change the platform and effectively customize it for every team that comes on board. If you only have 1 or 2 teams on the platform and you have 6 teams that you're going to let on quickly, and they're all doing something slightly different, it's a lot harder to make that argument because now you can't prioritize. You're rushing around. You're trying to figure out what every individual team needs. And then all of a sudden, the quality of service of the platform starts to go down. Not everybody's quite as happy using it. They're complaining to their managers that they're blocked because the platform team doesn't do X, Y, and Z. And then everybody kind of has to back up and reset a little bit. If you can keep up with that, now all of a sudden your platform has become very complicated, maybe supports many more features than it needs. And you're right back to where you started from, where you've got 3 teams doing things 4 different ways. And that's not what you want either.
You have to think of how, like, as you grow the number of teams on your platform, the number of demands that come to your team are going to grow potentially exponentially, right? And if you're trying to stay lean and fast with your team's ability to iterate, but then scale the actual platform adoption slowly, by onboarding more teams too quickly, you're going to find that you quickly move from being a product-focused team that is prioritizing features based on a product mindset into a traditional ticket-based team that's just pulling things off of a queue in Jira, which is directly the opposite of what you're trying to achieve with the platform engineering experience. Something else that the deck that reminded me of was somebody at KubeCon said, if people don't build things on your platform that surprise you, you haven't built a platform yet. I thought that was pretty interesting, because it's somewhat true. Like, if you have iterated on your platform long enough that when you do start to let people in the gate, they do things that you didn't expect and it just works for them, I think you've got an interesting story to tell. And that's maybe a signifier that you could start to let more and more people onto your platform. Jessica, I think, or did you want to?
Yeah, comment. I would build on top what you said about the slow growth, the S curve. I think the important part of the S curve, or this kind of slow growth, is to leave time for experimentation. Our initial ideas may not work. So if we build a plan that gives us the freedom to experiment and then change the technical solution or the processes, with one team or two teams on the platform, this is way easier. If we too early commit to additional teams and the additional capabilities, then all the changes, it will be less. It will be harder for us to kind of change the technical solution because the pipeline and the plan is in place.
Yeah, it reminds me of the example I've seen before, where a team will start up and maybe pick up Circle CI or GitHub Actions or something like that, some sort of workflow pipeline-based tool, right? And they all have their benefits. And then immediately install Argo CD or Flux or something on top of it, like weeks later, without really getting into, as a platform team, experimenting with the capabilities and requirements that they needed from just a basic pipeline perspective. And so they have then, in a way, added on yet another workflow type engine into their process, or have tried to consume a brand new pattern into their platform way earlier than they ever needed that. Because if you think about scaling slowly, you probably don't need something as powerful as GitOps if you're only running on one cluster with a few teams, and you can keep that complexity away from yourself and work more on those self-service APIs for a while, or the other things that your platform needs, before you get to that level of needing to handle really complicated distributed problems. Nothing against GitOps or Argo or Flux or anything. Those tools have their place and we use them all the time. But we often see people jump into those patterns way too soon. And so I like Kaspar's point of scaling slowly, because I think you can focus on a much smaller level and not get into those problems, because the moment you go into that larger distributed context where you're deploying to 12 clusters at once with one of those tools, you exponentially increase the time it takes for you to change your platform.
That's exactly it. Thinking about the relationship of how much time should I, how much, like, can I give a ground for the user base that's right in front of me to serve them to a degree where it's automated? And I know that if that exact team would come on 10 times, I would not need to scale a single additional user. A single additional platform engineer, right? That's how you want to think about this. And then say, okay, now we have found, like, we have that first team, and then we want to look at common denominators in our tech stack. And that's, I think, so important that there's also a discussion as a broader organization. What do we want to optimize on, right? And what are the golden paths that we're going to support? And at some point, dare I say it, I think the service design also has to follow the platform design, and not to a degree where, that's a controversial topic, not to a degree where I'm sacrificing performance or something, right? But to say, well, if if there is, if there's several, I mean, there are several ways to configure, I don't know, cache in a certain context, let's say staging. And if I say, okay, well, the platform offers me option A, and I don't need to sacrifice application performance to consume that pattern, right? Then I should follow that thing rather than doing A.2 that is just a tiny little bit different, but I don't justify this through performance differences on the application level. And in order to reach this, in my opinion, we at some point in the organization, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because I'm not sure everybody agrees, but I think at some point we have to come to a point where there need to be some sort of cost attached to deviating from the golden path. Like there needs to be a material reason why I'm leaving the path, and that reason in my mind cannot be, I mean, it can be totally fine. It can be, I just dislike being abstracted away. That's fine. I mean, I totally respect that. But then you pay some sort of price because you're increasing the cost for the organization. And whether that is you're on call, it's not SLA backed, you go through more draining security reviews. And that is a decision that in my mind, management also has to take, to say, okay, this is working. We'll make it attractive to be on the path. We'll make it just a tiny little bit unattractive to be off the path. What do you think about this? Is that, are we hurting freedom, or is that something that's worth thinking about?
No, we do that all the time. To give a really concrete example, once you do start scaling up and have a bunch of teams come in and they have requirements that the platform can't currently meet, or they just don't want to stay on the path and want to do something else. Like let's say in the context of Amazon, just for example, if we built the platform there, if there's a feature that the team needs right now that the platform doesn't support, we ask them to go create their own account through that company's standard account factory processes and just peer that service, maybe via private link or something, to our platform, or maybe mutual TLS, and then they can consume it, through our self-service networking capabilities that we've built into that platform. There's a lot of friction for them to do that, though, because they have to own their own account and go through the security process of doing so and making sure that that service is an approved service by the organization. And so there's just enough friction there that they might consider going back to the golden path and seeing if they can find a way to do it within there. And that's been pretty effective in a lot of cases.
Yeah, one thing that this
sorry, Sean.
One thing that this also calls out to is that idea of do something for one team 10 times better. Because you certainly, as an organization, can't always say, build it and they will come, meaning it's totally optional to use the platform, right? Because it's a significant investment to put a platform in place. So it doesn't necessarily make sense to start that investment and then just hope that people will like it, like a generic product on the market. Now, at the same time, you also don't want to force people to use it, because then you're immediately putting people on the defensive of saying, how do I fit this into my backlog? I don't have time to do that. It doesn't even make sense. So what you want to do is you want to offer a compelling product that will encourage people to come use it, so that you don't have to force them to come and use it. And if it's 10 times better than what they're doing, they're going to be much more likely to want to be on that golden path, because they have a very good reason to do it. It provides value to them. It either makes their release process easier, or makes it easier to conform to company standards, or whatever it may be. And to the point that was made earlier, there's always going to be a need for experimentation. There is always going to be a need to go out of the box. You do want to encourage the ability to do that. You don't want to block it completely. But in our experience putting these in, you want to hit the 80%. You want to look for those 80% of teams that are doing something standard enough that it'll make sense for them to come onto the platform, and make them feel like it's a really good idea to do so. Jacek, I know you had your hand up.
Yeah,
and then
I would
Andy,
just
I'm not
comment
sure if
on what
you
you said,
wanted
build
to
on
jump
top
in.
where you said that don't force people because that puts the users at defense. This is, very true. But there is another aspect is that for the people that are building the platform, if they're in the position that they know that the part of the solution or the solution will be enforced and mandated, that changes how they're thinking about the solution. And unfortunately, I witnessed this firsthand. We were building something that was mandated, and we kind of lost our senses when it comes to the product mindset. We ignore some of the critical feedback, and that led to poor outcomes. The solution was not easy to use at all. And that was because we knew that it was mandated and we didn't pay enough attention to make sure that we deliver the best what we can.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So we have talked about the early phase a little bit. I also think it's absolutely interesting to look then at the next step. So this early phase gets you into the room. What keeps you in the room? That can differ a lot because especially today, we are all under constant scrutiny of budget reviews. At least I am. So it might be different in your case because you're living in a fairy tale. Here are the next thing that I thought about, and this is really like I've just created this because somebody asked me, and I've never showed this to anybody really. So you can tear this apart. But the next four things that I thought about, okay, how do you go beyond the first team? Number one is measure, something I would like to cover, right? Number two is share your success, right? If you're building a product, you're also building a marketing team, etc. Essentially, because you want to spread the word. How do you do this? Then I think, how do you prioritize the right teams next? Is a good one because there's still always the situation, and here I have a funny story from a vendor perspective that might be interesting. So if you're selling a product, you're never selling to the US West Coast. And why is that? Because on the US West Coast, you have a ton of people that are building stuff themselves, and they're also super opinionated and want to do everything themselves. Plus, they have the budgets. You will always, and when I was building my first organization, I was always thinking like, why the hell do we have so much interest in US West on the data perspective, but nobody's buying our stuff? And the reason is, I always thought like we're stupid. We're making like I had two colleagues investigating this for a week, whether we, for instance, serve ads the wrong way. Is there a consistent problem? But there was no consistent problem. It's just that I asked the guys at HashiCorp, same thing for them. Nobody buys their stuff in US West early on. And then comes the point where the solutions are so mature that the US West Coast says, okay, now we're looking at this as well. Happens every time. Like longest time, Jenkins was US West, and then GitHub Actions is so mature, the US West will just take that on. Same thing for platforms, actually. Like the mature teams, they will jump as soon, like your mature teams are like US West, right? Like no matter what you do, they will not use it. And some might never, but at some point you hit the maturity, and so it's so important to understand like what's your US West team, and what's the nicest sector is US East financial services. They always want to get the best. So what's your US East financial services team? That's the one that you want to use next. And then there's sticks and carrots. Make it nice to be on, but not nice to be off the platform. So yeah, I'll stop sharing here. Sean, you're doing a lot of measurement stuff. How do you prove the value of a platform, measuring it to stay in the room?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to baselining, right? So one of the most important things to do is to understand what things look like before you had the platform. Because you're not going to go in and start a whole new organization or start a whole new engineering practice and immediately say that we're going to put in an engineering platform, at least not that I've ever seen. So you're always putting in the engineering platform to solve problems that you already have. But a lot of organizations that we walk into don't understand how significant those problems are. So if you have a platform and you're saying we want to increase speed to delivery, yes, we can kind of understand at a gut level that things feel like they're deploying faster. But unless we really looked and understood how we were deploying before the platform, we're not going to have those KPIs to show us from a quantitative point of view just how much faster we're deploying. And 9 times out of 10, the difference is actually more significant than people would realize it was. But each organization is going to have slightly different goals. They're going to have slightly different pain points. We had organizations that aren't concerned about delivery speed because maybe they're in a highly regulated industry. They can't deploy multiple times a day, so they don't really care if they're deploying multiple times a day. But they do need to increase the standardization on their compliance or on their security. And by being able to show the number of teams that are applying to certain standards within the organization and be able to show it in an automated way, in the best case, we can really show that the platform is making an impact because now teams are able to develop those features faster, but still be able to comply. And then the release schedule kind of follows from that. It's not top of mind.
Yeah, I like to think about it sort of in those 2 ways as well, where it's like you will often, talk to new teams about what's their time to, say, spin up a new service or a new team, for example. And you go to an older, more established company, and that time's probably maybe a month or 2, right? Depending on how long that is. And that's just to get a bare bones service into production, right? And so we often will set that number as a metric that we keep track of, and then use it as a way to prioritize features and stories within a product mindset that bring that metric down. So for example, if we can get a brand new team spun up and actually deploying just a baseline API into production within an hour, we feel like that's success, right? It's like we've gone from 2 months to 1 hour. And it's like there's a lot of features within security and compliance that go into being able to facilitate that. But if you can get to that point and you prioritize your stories based on that metric, I often find that you meet the needs of compliance and security by trying to meet that metric. Like if we are going to allow, you kind of have to ask yourself, if we're going to allow developers to go from nothing to a brand new API serving traffic in production in that short amount of time, what sorts of things does the platform need to do to enable that, so that when compliance and security are doing audits or taking a look at the platform, they're comfortable, right? And so we completely flip like security scanning on its head and say, let's move security scanning into the boundaries of the cluster with admission controllers and let developers do scanning work themselves, however they choose. As long as they're meeting that need, we can verify it on deployment. We look at things like auditability of certain workloads or access. And if we use things like policy as code within our platform, we're able to immediately assign the proper identities and rights to teams without giving them direct access to cloud workload or to cloud vendor accounts through the APIs of the platform and through things like OIDC or through claims onto their workloads. And that enables us to pass audits very quickly because we're like, we can show if you're not a member of this team in GitHub, you're not able to do anything within the platform. And you're able to prove that through a few lines of code. And so it's features like that where you're able to prioritize getting that number down and you're meeting the needs of security and compliance at the same time. We found that to be really powerful.
I like
Jessica, you have your hand up?
I got a question this time. Productivity is tricky to capture, to measure. There is an idea that instead of measuring directly productivity, under the assumption that the adoption of the platform is voluntary, measuring adoption is a proxy for measuring productivity. if people are on the platform, that means that there is some value that they are getting from the platform. Did you have any experience with that? Does it work? Does it doesn't?
So
What are your thoughts?
I'm a little careful with adoption because, you know, to be a little mean, but if we stay with that example, you know, we have a huge amount of Jenkins scripts and we put Backstage on top, right? And adoption is measured by the amount of user seats in Backstage. Then you can say, well, fantastic adoption, but I would guess the return on investment on this is net negative. Like you would need to, you know, genuinely convince me that you're getting anything out for the organization there. This is something that we've been pulling apart for the longest time, because the question is, what do you measure? And I think what you measure, and I guess like we're you know, this is funny, this platform engineering thing is so early on, really, that nobody really has an answer here. You can't really take DORA. I mean, you can take DORA metrics, but DORA metrics are super hard to measure, and then they're also pretty relative, because you have that in general in all of those measurements, it's only before and after, so it's like a diff in diff.
They're lagging. They're lagging months.
Exactly, and they're lagging indicators. And so, the thing that we're experimenting with internally, and this is really just us, and I'm thinking about putting this out, is first, you know, this diff and diff. You articulate the problem, you measure the state, you build something, and then you measure again, and then you derive a return on investment. And you're saying essentially exactly this. We have lagging indicators. What we actually need is a leading indicator. And so we were thinking about a framework we call MOPED, measuring operational performance in engineering teams. And most of my colleagues hated the idea. But the idea is essentially to come up with measurements, and we've been trying this with the first cohorts, where we do an is analysis on the workflow performance. So we're just looking at the, you know, like a Snapchat in the workflow, and we say, okay, let's measure this. So here are 4 things we're currently testing: autonomy score as a proxy of the degree of self-service and workflow automation. And what we do is essentially we take what's the total number of requests per year that a central team gets from application developers, and we do 1 divided by this, and we look at how this trends. So that's one thing that we're testing at the moment. Then the second thing is just service create time. You really take like 1 snapshot of something and say, okay, how long does it take to do the exact same thing before, after? Again, only relevant as a diff in diff. Then onboarding time, that's the time to first PR and the time to 10th PR. And then we do a dev satisfaction score, because there's usually a proxy, because developers hate to wait. So that's usually like a pretty good correlation. I think there was something else that we did, like a complexity, or we tested a complexity index to figure the degree of standardization, but that was too complex to compute. That didn't really work. And so that's something that we've been testing with 10 cases now. And it's at least easier to compute. But then the question is, how do you roll this over into a return on investment? Again, pretty non-trivial to do this. And then we have the things that are platform performance measurements at the end. And that I think is definitely adoption, but then I would talk about daily adoption. And it's things like fully loaded cost of the platform. Because in the end, the fact that we're introducing a platform team needs to offset costs somewhere else. Productivity is one thing, cost on the resources is another thing, but also, can we stop the operation team from scaling linearly with the amount of developers? Can we detach this? Is a good one. But we need, in my opinion, way more experience and, frankly, data to measure platform performance. So if somebody has an idea, all ears.
Great feedback. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Are there any ideas, John, Brian? Any like how do you do this at the moment?
Yeah, so the way we look at our platform value model again is baselining to see what it's returning to the organization. And you're right in that part of it is that not all of these measurements are quantitative, right? And that developer satisfaction score, you know, that's kind of a qualitative metric in a lot of ways. Some of this you're also measuring opportunity cost, which is very difficult to prove, right? So if I think of autonomy score, something very similar to that we tried to measure in one of the platforms we put in was percentage of capabilities enabled by the platform that are self-service. Now, the reason we wanted to look at that was, one, it's indicative of the usability of the platform by teams without having to put in tickets. And this is specifically for the platform team to be able to track their own performance on the backlog in terms of planning stories and making sure they've thought about self-service. But the other is it gets you out of that cycle of your team is responding to tickets and support requests for things that aren't working right in the platform so much that you're not actually developing new platform features. And now your users aren't getting a better experience day over day because you're just spending all your time on support. And now you have to grow the platform team because you need more people to do the support to be able to keep up with the features. But then you're releasing not self-service features and it becomes this infinite loop, right? But again, you're kind of almost measuring that opportunity cost there of saying, well, what would we be able to do if we weren't handling all these tickets? But the fact of the matter is you are, so you just don't know, right? And that's part of what we struggle with. And I think, you know, that's why I always go back to baselining of let's look at what we can measure so that we can show what is better than it was before, knowing that, you know, increase in delivery frequency, is that entirely associated with the platform, or are teams adopting new ways of working? Or are we putting in, you know, new CI/CD tooling that makes it a little bit easier? It's not 100% correlation that the platform caused these things, but it's certainly indicative that it affected it to be able to show the value there.
Yeah,
I think,
Brian.
yeah, I think we get like a lot of measurable value out of. I think Sean was kind of teasing on this a bit. You know, maybe 10 years ago, you'd have a modernization effort where you brought in Jenkins or Circle CI or something, and you started to see what was perceived as value because teams are consuming it and using it and running their pipelines every day, right? And where I think you can measure the platform value of this is, are you consuming or are you producing reusable artifacts within those systems of your platform that people are actually adopting and using? And how often are they doing them successfully? So like, to give a concrete example, let's say you have a Circle CI org that handles Kubernetes deployment to any clusters that you give it by a list, and you have 10 teams on the platform and you see 9 of them using it. And maybe you also measure how often it's actually successful in doing so. You could potentially use that as a baseline metric to see if the things that you're producing for these teams to make them go faster are actually being consumed and used. And this can be used as a way to also prioritize whether you create and continue to maintain things like that for your platform over time. So I found that to be pretty useful.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the baseline is it's important to think about this from day one, because you need to get that status quo measurement now before, you know, the platform is in place, so that you can do attribution, and you know, you're also harvesting once harvest time comes. Yeah. Cool. What are if we're looking at this year, what are the things? What have we learned? Is a thing that I always love to ask. Like, if we're looking at the Gartner hype cycle, and I'm sorry, speaking about Gartner so much today. Like, I like Gartner, but I'm not sure I should give them that much airtime. Like, we are approaching I think they call it the trough of disillusionment in platform engineering, where, you know, a good amount of teams are waking up and going, oh, this was not what we expected, before we then go into the mainstream. What have we learned in the last 12 months that we can do better in the next 12 to avoid not being in that disillusionment team? Anything comes to mind? Jacek, please.
Yeah.
I'm looking, so the baseline for me, or this kind of what we did in the past, was adopt product mindsets, product managers, platform product managers. That is great, but this is not sufficient, because past months I see that it can get to problems, because in case of the big organization, big enterprise, this is very much complicated, and we need to understand this kind of end-to-end. So I would say that now I'm testing more like a system thinking approach to the platform, understanding incentives and the feedback loops and casual diagrams, how things work in the organization. And I think this is something that I will be looking at.
Awesome. I think, one thing I'll say is, as we've kind of seen, the platform engineering hype cycle, so to speak, right? Where, everybody wants to do platform engineering. People are realizing that platform engineering isn't easy. You can't just buy any product off the market, come put it in, it'll be a silver bullet that will just suddenly make platform engineering standardized across your org. And then all your development processes will be efficient and smooth. There's also a recognition at this point that platform engineering often requires a certain scale to be truly effective, depending on the type of engineering platform you put in place. So a fully automated Kubernetes engineering platform may not make sense for a team of 10 developers at a startup, especially if they're on 4 teams doing wildly different things. At 50 developers, maybe it still doesn't make sense to have something that's fully orchestrated, because we're not deploying new infrastructure all that often, but maybe it does make sense to have reusable pipeline actions, or maybe even reusable Terraform modules that are produced by a central team, so that we can start to get some governance standardization. And we can grow into that end state of the platform at some point. I've seen work being done on platform engineering maturity models at this point, and it starts to feel like because of these concerns, maybe a maturity model doesn't quite make sense yet, because it makes everybody feel like I have to be at 5. And 5 may not make sense for everybody, depending on your size or the type of development concerns you have. So I think these are the things that we're starting to figure out. And the last one really is cost becoming an increasing concern. FinOps is really becoming a huge movement, a huge top of mind topic for people. And how can we embed FinOps into our engineering platforms to kind of help drive more efficient usage of particularly cloud resources across, especially a large organization, through these platform engineering practices?
I think for me, there's probably 2 big realizations over the last year. I think the first one is this concept of, the people always talk about developers just want to code, and I'm finding more and more that that's not really true, and that shouldn't be a goal of platform engineering. The reason I say that is, you find that as you abstract away more and more of the platform from development teams, the more and more reliant they become on you when things don't work. And the reason for that is, if you are not leaving a baseline of understanding of how the platform is enabling them and making them kind of take that next step to understand what's actually occurring, then when it doesn't work, or when they have an issue, they're going to come and place demands on your team to help them figure it out, because they have zero understanding of how it works under the hood. So it's trying to find this kind of balance between providing useful capabilities and self-service APIs to teams, while at the same time not completely abstracting away everything from them, so that their lives are just purely code. And we found that not only is that probably a goal you don't want to have, but it's actually a very frustrating experience for your development teams over time, because they often do want to have a deeper level of knowledge and understanding of the platform. That doesn't mean they want to be platform engineers, but it does mean that a development team wants to have control of, say, like maybe you build a DynamoDB orchestrator via your platform engineering, system, whatever you choose. They're going to want to have access to which regions they're actually enabling within it. Maybe how they're doing sharding or keys, or how they're doing replication or backups. It's like, you don't need to make all those choices for them. They probably have better knowledge of how they need to use that tool than you do. And so enabling them to do that and consume the service that way is really important. So we found that to be pretty effective. The other thing that we've noticed quite often is, sorry, I lost it for a moment. The exercise.
You have it? Okay.
Sorry, I remembered it. So this is something I talk a lot about with one of our really intelligent stakeholders at Ritchie Brothers. His name is Ranveer Chawla, and he used to work on the same team as me, Sean. He likes to say this line, and I like to quote him on it. Platform engineering is an exercise in software engineering, not operations. And I've thought about that a lot, and I think it's actually a really useful term or phrase to think about. The reason they say that is we often find in platform engineering projects that you will try to bring operations teams along to define a platform, and without applying software engineering mindset and principles to the creation of it, you end up just creating the same thing all over again with tickets and queues and operations-based processes. So it's really important to bring expertise personnel into the picture who have a software-focused and product-focused experience. Go ahead, Kaspar. I know we're at time.
No, a lot of wisdom in those statements. Thank you very much. That's I just took a lot of notes. Yeah, we should freeze that and get back to them, because those are very, very clever points. I'll leave it at this because we're out of time here. Thank you very much for the lively discussion. Much appreciated. I hope to see all of you very soon. And if you have ideas in terms of what we should talk about, if you have ideas about event formats we can do, if you want to talk at one of these events, please reach out to us. This community is only as good as the input it receives from all of you. And yeah, looking forward to the next chat. And with that, thank you especially to you, Sean and Brian. A wonderful day or night to you wherever you are on the planet, and see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice day.